Yo, so I think Vampire Weekend just made it 5 for 5 in terms of high quality, and I mean super high quality album releases. This is kind of a rarity. Usually you have even, some of the coolest and best indie bands, they'll have the albums that were really good and the albums that were not so good, and you've got a lot of in between. But with this latest album, Only God Was Above Us, I think Vampire Weekend is in that rare class where each of their first 5 albums is either a potential step up from the last, or it's at least on par with their previous work. There might be one caveat. Now, again, they are 5 albums deep now. I remember when they first dropped their self-titled album in 2008. I was just enamored by this kind of new sound. Yes, it did derive a lot of sounds from a lot of current and past genres and artists. Most notably, who are they compared to? Certain ska acts, or like The Police, or Paul Simon. You've got a lot of different influences, and they also hit these classical fever pitches where it's just off to the races with this exhilarating sound full of nice sounding keys and sometimes strings and guitar and some either Afro beat or hand percussion. It's a mixture of a lot of different genres that kind of create this cacophony of sound that I kind of see to be vintage Vampire Weekend. So they kind of put their hand in a lot of different genres to create what they have, and that couldn't be further exemplified than in their debut album. But their next album, Contra, wasn't seen as a misstep. In fact, it was almost just as interesting as the debut, but for different reasons. Contra had some fantastic songs. One of my favorite Vampire Weekend songs, called Diplomat's Son, is on there with that cha 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 cha, and then like the way that he sings, like it's a very kind of light tone that he's singing with. And Ezra Koenig has a very unique sound in his voice, like you could tell when it's him singing. And I remember listening to like the intro, the first song of that second album, Contra. It was a single called Horchata. Now they've got some bigger songs like Holiday. I remember playing in a few commercials around that time. You had White Sky, that was also a pretty popular song, but Holiday, again, I heard that in like commercials. Giving Up the Gun was another big song. But when I first heard their first single, which ended up being track 1 from the album, Horchata, you listen to those explosions of sound and it's like, yeah, they just recaptured that magic and bottled it up into that song, Horchata. Again, signature Vampire Weekend. So you would be hard pressed to find a misstep, especially when you consider that their next album, their third album, it's probably their most critically acclaimed album. Like, I think that their debut is still my favorite. Like, everything from Mansard Roof, the opener, to, The Kids Don't Stand a Chance at the end, or Walcott, Don't You, like Walcott, the song, one of my favorite Vampire Weekend songs as well. And that debut album also has 2 of their most popular songs. It's got A-Punk and Oxford Comma. Who gives about an Oxford Comma? Yeah, I just love their sound, if you can't tell. But their third album is their most critically acclaimed. That's the one that was pretty much on the top or near the top of most album of the year lists. Like, it hit number 1 album of the year for a lot of different publications. For instance, Pitchfork, that was Pitchfork's number 1 album of 2013. It was Rolling Stone's number 1 album of 2013. So yeah, Modern Vampires of the City is probably their masterpiece. That's like their Mona Lisa. Again, it's not my favorite, even though I could get why it is so praised and held in such high esteem. It was a nice balance of their vintage sound. Like, if you want to hear a song with their vintage sound, listen to the song Step. I believe it's track 3. But then they also have these different style songs for them. Like, at the time, the song Diane Young was kind of unique for them. So was Yahweh, which was pronounced kind of as Yahweh in the actual song. That's another one that was kind of unique for them at the time. I mean, even their album opener, Obvious Bicycle, that was very different, a different style of opener from them. It was a lot slower, and on this album they have a few slower songs. Not that they didn't have slow songs in the past, but those slow songs that they had in the past, they still captured that same vintage Vampire Weekend sound This one kind of takes more left turns. It's an interesting album, very good album. Again, this is pretty much their most highly praised album. But then their main composer left the band, Rostam. He exited the band after that album. And if there is a misstep in their catalog, for me, it would be Father of the Bride. Like, to me, I don't enjoy that album nearly as much as the other four. But I mean, with that said, that album, like Modern Vampires of the City, still won the Grammy for Best Alternative Music Album. So even their misstep was like an award-winning misstep. But I thought that the album was too bloated, too long of an album. I thought that there were too many songs that just didn't grab me in the same way that most of the track lists of their past albums did. So I kind of looked at that as being, okay, maybe the party's over. Now that Rostam's not in the band, maybe what they are lacking with his compositions and with his arrangements and so forth, maybe it's just going to be felt in their music going forward. But somehow, with this new album, Only God Was Above Us, they not only captured that vintage sound, but I would say that this might be a top 3 out of 5 albums in their catalog. Like, this to me is the closest sounding to their debut since their debut. It sounds closer to the debut than Contra, Modern Vampires, and Father of the Bride. To me, Only God Was Above Us kind of takes us back to the initial reasons why I gravitated towards Vampire Weekend and their sound in the first place. I so enjoyed this album from top to bottom. I didn't really run into a song that I didn't like. I mean, first of all, their tracks 1 through 3, phenomenal. It's as good as I think any one of their albums, tracks 1 through 3. Ice Cream Piano, Classical, and Capricorn. And then when you move down a little bit to Prep School Gangsters, The Surfer, Gen X Cops, Mary Boone, one of the best songs on the album. This whole thing, another thing I like about them, by the way, is that they usually keep their albums pretty short. They don't, I mean, Father of the Bride, I think was their longest album, but this one is only 10 songs. Their self-titled debut album, only 11 songs. Their second album, Contra, 10 songs. Like, they kind of keep it nice and tight. And I like that. I've always liked that about them. But yeah, this 5th album is a true return to form. Rostam does produce 1 song on the album, so they managed to pull it off even in Rostam's absence. And this was such a refreshing listen. I'm like, oh, I haven't heard them sound quite like this in a while. Again, I love Modern Vampires of the City, arguably their best album, definitely critically their best album. But in terms of returning to that original sound, this 5th album just did that. And I couldn't be more pleased about that. But yeah, Vampire Weekend, again, it's a rarity that you get a band or an artist that has like 80 or higher with every album on like Metacritic, 8 or higher with every album for Pitchfork. So the level of consistency, like who are some artists that you could think of that are that consistent album over album? Like one of my favorite bands, Tame Impala, I don't even think that they are that consistent. Like, between Currents and the Slow Rush, there might be a misstep. It's tough to tell. I mean, they changed so much with those last 2 albums compared with their first 2 albums. But, look at other bands, MGMT, people don't love their self-titled 3rd album. Fleet Foxes, I don't think that they have had anything as good as their debut self-titled album since that album. I think that that's by far the best Fleet Foxes album, although I know a lot of people like Helplessness Blues. Fiona Apple, maybe. Outkast, I think Outkast has been that consistent, the rap duo with Andre and Big Boy. I think that they are in that category. I would say Fiona Apple, again, she is probably up there. Yeah, she's certainly up there. I would say Kendrick Lamar, album over album, has maintained and exceeded that type of quality, just album over album, no missteps. Through their first 3, I would have said Arcade Fire with, Funeral, Neon Bible, and The Suburbs. But I think that their albums after that have been a little bit of a drop off compared to those first 3. So yeah, Vampire Weekend, album over album, is about as consistent as you get. Let me know if you could think of any others that maintain that super high standard with each album release. It's really kind of tough to find, especially when the artist gets into their like 4th and 5th album. Sometimes you get off to a great start where your first 2 or 3 even albums are phenomenal, but then there might be a drop off with albums 4, 5 and beyond or something, you know? But yeah, I love Vampire Weekend sound. Again, they've got that mix of that classical music where they just have those almost harpsichord or some sort of like a piano-like instrument. I think it's actually a Chamberlin, which is also like a mellotron. So I think that that's what we get when we get those very pretty sounding classical pieces on a lot of those Vampire Weekend songs. But you, again, have that. You've got organ in some songs. You got guitar, strings, bass, shakers, and again, hand percussion in certain songs. And again, it's a mix of different sounds and genres. Listen to like Paul Simon's Graceland, and you could kind of see where some of the Vampire Weekend sound derived from. I remember, you know, with other songs like A-Punk, some people would say like The Police, or even some Sublime leanings with a couple songs like A-Punk. But I would say that Paul Simon is pretty much the closest parallel I could think of, because it just sounds like it's grabbing from so many different regions of the world and so many different time periods and genres. But it's a very interesting mix that makes up Vampire Weekend. Let me know if you are already a fan. Let me know if you do or don't listen to them, if you do or don't like them. If you do like them, let me know what a few of your favorite Vampire Weekend songs are, and let me know what your favorite, this one's gonna be tough, what your favorite 1 or 2 Vampire Weekend albums are. For me, it would be the debut, and I'm kind of torn. I respect, like, Modern Vampires is phenomenal, fantastic. That's like my brother's favorite Vampire Weekend album. But for me, my second favorite might be either Contra or even this new one. Like this new one, Only God Was Above Us. Don't sleep on this. I think that this really maintains that Vampire Weekend standard that they set, especially with those first 3 albums. So again, you could argue whether or not Father of the Bride was a misstep for the band, but let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.